the network for the AV industry.
What are you listening to?
This
is AV.
This
is AVNation.
This is AVNation.
This is Connected.
Greetings and welcome to this episode of AVNation TV's Connected. I'm your host, David Danto, and I've got a great group of guys here to have another industry chat, one of our legendary and infamous chats around what's going on in the world. So hopefully you'll get a lot out of it and we won't get that much flack coming from all the nasty things we say. Let me introduce my panel to you. First, we have David Maldo. Introduce yourself.
Hi, my name's David Maldo. I'm the founder and CEO of Let's Do Video. We cover business communication and team productivity. You can find that everything at letsdovideo.com.
Thank you, David. Erwin, you want to introduce yourself?
Sure. Hi, I'm Erwin Lazar, Vice President and Service Director with an analyst firm called Nemertes Research. I lead our coverage around unified communications and collaboration, and you can find us at Nemertes, Nemertes.com.
Terrific. Simon?
Good morning, David. Simon Dudley, newly minted Head of Sales Enablement for Logitech Video Collaboration.
I saw that on LinkedIn this morning, and I was wondering how he came up with that interesting term, but congratulations if that's in order.
It is, and it doesn't mean I get let go of anything else, so jack of many trades.
Okay, terrific. And last and certainly not least, we have Tim Albright, the head of AVNation TV, joining us. Why don't you introduce yourself, Tim?
Hello, my name is Tim Albright. I'm, as David said, the head of AVNation, founder and I don't know if I'm president or CEO at this point, but you can find us at avnation.tv or myself on Twitter at TD Albright.
You know, Tim, you could make yourself the head of sales enablement if you like.
I could make myself chief bottle washer, which is what I typically tell people.
Okay, so as we're recording this, it's around near the end of March. We've got a week to go. And ISE is certainly in the books, and we just finished Enterprise Connect. So why don't we talk about what we've seen and what we heard and what's going on? Tim, I'll let you and then Simon talk about what you think were the big themes coming out of ISE, specifically around the collab and other spaces and the whole industry in general, because we're all morphing and changing. So what were your perspectives on some of the big stories coming out of there?
For me, the biggest stories out of ISE was a couple different things. First of all, was the official start of the video over the network wars have begun. For a long time in the last few years, as each technology has kind of figured its way in the world and kind of massaged the algorithms that they've been using, all of the players have been kind of playing nicely. Oh yeah, that's a nice technology. Here's what we have. Now we have the comparison and contrast videos in the booths and in the stands, and see this is what makes ours so much better, and this is what makes ours so much better, and isn't this great? So those wars have begun, and what it's going to be interesting is seeing the differences between the marketing speak and the hype on the show floor and what actually happens in the field.
So the next generation of the projector shootout is a network shootout and a codec shootout.
I would actually love to see that. Frankly, I would love to see that for a couple of different reasons. Number one, it would actually give the installers and the design engineers a real apples to apples comparison, right? The difficulty with doing a projector type shootout for video over IP is the switch differences, right? Because depending on whether you're talking 10 gig and 1 gig, and that's about as far as I'm going to go is for naming out different technologies, each one has their own switch preferences and each one has their own switch configurations. So yes, you could probably get away with maybe doing a Cisco type standardizing on a Cisco switch maybe, but beyond that, I'm not sure you could do it properly to make sure that everybody has the exact same thing. The other thing coming out of that is honestly the globalization, the realization that the global presence of this industry. ISE from a attendee standpoint was just over 80,000. Simon can tell you the first 2 days was absolutely insane when it comes to the press of people in all the halls, right? And let's be frank here, there are 15 halls now, whereas 3 years ago there were 12. And so the show itself has grown exponentially over the last 5 or 6 years. And so the globalization of this industry has actually come home, and it is a real thing now. And as far as UC and collaboration, there was a lot of really great small incremental changes, right? Whether that was the interactive technologies of wireless video from several different companies, the increasing availability of really great high quality cameras that aren't going to cost you an arm and a leg, right? That you can deploy easily, quickly, and without breaking the bank, and you can deploy them over a large network and over a large enterprise where
And we've seen that before, right? But we're now starting to see everybody go in that direction.
everybody's doing it. Yeah, and that's the thing. And this is not to steal a phrase from a digital signage friend of mine. This is not cheap Chinese crap, right? This is not, this is good stuff that you can.
Everybody, that was Tim talking. T-I-M.
Yeah.
That wasn't me.
And he, when he says it, he says it in relation to cheap Chinese LED. Well, this is not that, right? This is some great stuff that folks can consistently and confidently deploy to all of their disparate workers, right? And all of the folks that they're trying to connect and collaborate together. I read a stat the other day that 55% of businesses have some sort of remote meeting on a daily basis. 55%, right?
Yep.
So this is becoming a real concern and a real design concern when it comes to deploying and putting in UC systems throughout, regardless of which company you're dealing with and which client you're dealing with. So when you're able to take good quality, high quality, 1080p and beyond cameras that have good audio, this is going to increase the experience that the people in the room are having, and also the people remotely are having.
And Simon, without putting on your work hat and just being an observer of the industry, and you and I both with our IMCCA titles, would you agree with that coming out of ISE?
Yes, I mean, the first thing I would say to anyone who hasn't been to ISE is go, right? It's not that hard to get to Amsterdam if you're in the US. I personally, I don't know if Tim feels the same. I personally think ISE is the best show of the year. Amsterdam is a lot more fun to have a show in, even when it's always unbelievably cold. Unbelievably cold in Amsterdam. I don't know why. It seems to be the perfect temperature to kill you. But it's a fantastic show. I've very much enjoyed it. From the show's perspective, I was really interested to see how the whole interactive whiteboards, I know we're going to get to talk about what I'm doing at Infocom with that, with my IMCCA hat on later, but the number of interactive whiteboards was remarkable. And the number of products out there. I mean, I'm not trying to put my Logitech hat on, but just as an example, our products were on 80 other booths. I mean, that probably gives you a sense of how big the show is now.
Yeah, and what I was hearing from a lot of the attendees is that it was too big, that it became impossible to manage. Again with the tents up everywhere, and it's sometimes the show just grows bigger than it needs to be.
Well, I remember, I'm old enough, I'm sure you kids can't remember this, but I remember Comdex in the mid-90s, and that got to about 220,000, and that really truly was, I don't know if I can use the word biblical, but it was insane. To be honest, ISE was a big show. I didn't get to see probably more than a third of it, but you have to ask the question, does any one person need to see all of it? I don't know.
Well, and I had that same comment coming out of CES earlier in the year. I got to experience the blackout they had in the Central Hall, and there were a lot more people, and the show's focus, and a lot of these conferences' focus are starting to get a little bit wider probably than necessary. I think we need to try and narrow it down. But let's save that conversation for later in this broadcast.
Let me tell you very, very briefly, Dave. Maybe the answer is if you get as big as CeBIT in Hanover, then if you go into a hall and there's a combine harvester, and I went a few years ago and there was, then they've probably stretched it a little bit too far.
Well, the comment with CES is, you have automotive companies there showing concept cars, their booths taking up the size of a quarter of a football field. You don't need that to show a concept that doesn't actually even exist. That's just showing off and marketing. And again, do we need that at trade shows? And that's a debate for another time. But let me get Erwin and David involved in this, because the conversation about the cameras was something that also came up at Enterprise Connect. We saw Microsoft in their keynote talk about what they're referring to as intelligent framing or intelligent video. And they're the last joiner. I found it interesting that they in their keynote, which by the way was fantastic, it was the best keynote of the show. That in my opinion, that they were talking about how bad cameras have been, where you get this small shot way in the background. And the truth of the matter is, it's only the Microsoft systems that had the small shot way in the background. But now that they've solved that problem, it's not an issue with cameras that all now intelligently frame, where they zoom in on whoever's talking, figure out who's in the room to one extent or another. And that was when I think one of the big things to come out of Enterprise Connect was that as table stakes. I mean, Erwin, do you agree with that?
Yeah, I think there's a lot more emphasis on video, and you saw that at Enterprise Connect. Not only the announcement that you mentioned in terms of being able to frame and get a better picture, but even you just walking around the floor, it really seems like we used to have this separation between cloud video vendors and web conferencing vendors. They've all kind of morphed into one. You're seeing the video vendors starting to, at least the cloud video vendors like BlueJeans that we're using today, morphing into trying to focus on how do I improve the user experience within the room. So they had their announcement with Dolby. And so you begin to see the companies looking at, if I want to continue to expand that customer base, I have to figure out how to get video out of the main meeting boardroom and into those smaller spaces onto the desktops. And in order to do that, I have to deliver a higher quality experience that's also easier to use.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. David, are you on board with this?
Yeah, I'm very, very hot on the intelligent framing. A lot of times I think that we as analysts, we ask the industry for stuff. We say users want this. Users want ease of use, and the industry says, how about 720p? And we said, that's not what we asked for. We want ease of use. How about telepresence? Oh, it's wonderful. It's not what we asked for. We've been asking for this. No one likes using the remote control to pan and tilt Zoom. Users don't use it. If you're lucky, you have a good IT person. They'll set it up once, so it's a kind of a good angle of the room for some meetings, and that's the best you get. And we've been waiting for some way that when you're in a meeting with someone in a room, everyone looks good, whether it's the person at the far end of the table or the close end of the table. And we've seen so many approaches. Yeah, I just remembered we're talking about Microsoft being late to the game. One of the first attempts at this technology I remember was Link before Skype for Business, and it was terrible. It was default, and as you're talking, if you move your head, the camera would go whoop. Do you guys remember that? Link would by default kind of follow you around, and everyone hated it.
Yeah.
But now it's getting better, and what I think is interesting is we're still early enough that there's several approaches. Some of them use voice tracking with beamforming microphones. Some of them do facial recognition. They see my mouth moving. Some just follow torsos. They know what a human body looks like, and they don't care about who's speaking. If there's 3 people in the room, they'll try to get those 3 people. There's the speaker approach. There's the capture everyone in the room approach. There's a lot of innovation, and it's not just innovation for innovation's sake. It's not developers saying, "Hey, look what our code can do." It's like it's solving a problem. So this is one of the times where one of the big trends is actually something that, yes, I've been asking for this, so I'm happy.
And another one of the big trends that you see at the at Enterprise Connect, and you're going to see at InfoComm is Tim and I were chatting before the conference started, and we're going to tread lightly here because we don't want to piss off too many people, in all honesty. But there's this concept of the user experience that is starting to grow, and I am 100% behind this idea that everything is about the user experience. What's interesting from a debate standpoint is, are we talking about the user experience where we're wowing everybody with flashy stuff, or is the preferred user experience actually completely seamless and invisible? To what the point that you were making, David, is the idea that when I walk into a room or a system or a presentation, I don't want to touch anything. We've been building these conference rooms for years for us, for the technologists, and that's not who's using them. The people want to walk in. If the facial recognition off the camera will realize it's me, or if my beacon off of my phone or my voice, if they know it's me and I can say, hey, start my meeting, so I didn't have to touch anything, that's fabulous technology. That's a great experience, but it didn't get flashy. It got seamless. And, we saw, you see Alexa for Business, and you see a lot of the technologies around this. Microsoft showed it at the show. Cisco showed it, not on the stage this year. They showed it last year, their voice assistant for Spark. I think we're going to start to see these experiences get more invisible and easier to use.
Well, really quickly, David, to that point, I was at AVISPL's annual sales meeting this week, and in talking with their UC folks, they made the comment. They said we need to create experiences where the video meetings are as seamless as the in-person meetings, and this is the analogy they used. When you walk into a meeting, you have an in-person meeting. There's the four of us here. When we walk into a meeting and we know if you're not physically here, right? We know if David's not physically in the room, so we wait for David. If it's a video conference and let's say that you have two other far endpoints and you walk in and you're London, New York, and LA, and you're in LA, New York is dark and you don't know why, so you're sending emails, you're sending text, you're calling. Well, if it's seamless and it just happens, you walk into the room and New York and LA and New York and London are already on the screen, and you see that nobody's physically in the room. Well, they're just not there yet. It's the same kind of experience as, well, David's not in the room yet. They're saying, we need to make these UC meetings as seamless and as painless as possible, and as much like real in-person meetings as humanly possible.
And that was something that was talked about quite a bit by Cisco in their keynote, and that idea that you're in this team conversation, you're chatting with people. If you want to hold a meeting, that meeting shouldn't require people to take action where now I've got to go look up a number and dial in, but that they should automatically be invited into the meeting, or when the meeting start time happens, that they should automatically be pulled in or receive a note pop-up says click here to join. So yeah, to your point, trying to improve that ease of joining, that ease of use of the meeting.
The other angle I would add, and you guys are probably all too young to remember this, but I remember Picturetel, an old staple of this industry, back in about 1998, had a thing called Limelight, which was a voice tracking system, and it worked very well, I must say, for the speaker. The problem was that it didn't get the people who weren't speaking, but who were shaking their heads in the room. That was a problem. So, for this technology to work, it needs to be, to your point, David, it needs to be seamless to the point where the users don't even think about it. I think if you end up with a solution that's too busy, and to be honest, Picturetel Limelight 20 years ago was rather busy, and many customers would look at it and go, "That's amazing technology. Now switch it off." The other thing, of course, was the cost. At that time, that sort of technology, I forget now, was $6,000-7,000 even in those days. So if you're going to make this stuff realistic, it needs to be able to track people who aren't speaking but are scowling, or potentially or smiling or doing whatever it is people do in meetings. Scowl mainly in mine. And then it needs to be able to be unobtrusive so that it doesn't whiz around and give you that NYPD Blue effect, which users really hate.
Yeah, no, I think we all pretty much agree that the best experience in a lot of these cases is no experience, and that's the paradox. Because when everything is working right, you didn't know you had something good. Many of our colleagues, many of our clients that use these systems only hear about the 5 or 6 or 10 things that fell apart, that didn't work, because those are the ones that stand out on their mind. The hopefully hundreds or thousands of calls and conversations that work perfectly are definitely the ones that really don't get the press. So I think we're going to see more and more exploration around this concept of a paradox. That is it really about the experience? Are we really going to tout wonderful experiences when the best experience in the world is invisibility? So this is not the end of that conversation. It's just kind of the start of it. But let's make it the end of us beating it up.
Well, I just like to add one little point on experience. My definition of what a good experience is has changed a bit in the last few years. Now it kind of includes workflow. We used to say the experience was if it felt like you're actually like I want to reach out and shake your hand. It feels like we're in the same room. That's the ideal experience. And that was telepresence. And the first time telepresence was demoed to me, we had to go in a special room, and I wasn't allowed to bring in my coffee or my pen because I might write on something. And it wasn't because they didn't want me to take notes. It's because it was a $750,000 room, and they want me. And that's my normal workflow. My normal workflow isn't when I want to meet with my team, leave our desks, leave our normal meeting room, go into the special magic video conferencing room, and then have a natural working experience, and then go back to work. My natural working experience is if I want to talk to someone, and if they were in the office, I would reach out and talk to them. And if they're not in the office, I reach out and talk to them from wherever I am. So that's workflow is now part of, in my mind, natural experience.
Yeah, and we're going to definitely spend some time talking about teams and workflow. And why don't we go there just for a second? At Enterprise Connect, the everybody had a team. What's the old? You get a car, you get a car. And these guys have a team, those guys have a team. Facebook shows up, they have a team. Everybody has a team application going on right now. I was very happy to see Brent and Phil's presentation online. I couldn't go to it because I was actually presenting at the same time, where they had a slide where they're kind of saying the same thing I am, that we are in a mode right now where team chat and team collaboration applications are the latest industry nirvana, where it was WebRTC a few years ago and SIP trunks before that. I think people will realize that they don't scale to large enterprises the way people think they will, and eventually a couple of years from now they'll settle back into being used in an appropriate circumstance, just like any one of the rest of our tools. I don't think we're going to centralize around this, because from what I've seen, when you get 80% of an enterprise using this tool, but the last 20 or even 10% don't, then you've doubled your workload. You haven't reduced productivity. And a lot of people are still going to use email and still going to make phone calls and not be on the application. So I think it's a fad. I think it'll take its rightful place within a few years, but it certainly was, you couldn't spit without hitting somebody's team chat application, Enterprise Connect. Do you guys agree?
Yes, I think that my first statement would be on it's a bit of a hype cycle, right? Everyone got one because everyone else has one. I think it's also a bit of a Cambrian explosion moment, right? The Cambrian explosion in paleontology, all these new ideas came out and most of them failed. And then the body shapes that we have today evolved. And I think that that's what's going to happen in this space as well. That we don't know what the answer is going to look like from 5 years or in 5 years from now. So everyone's trying 1,000 different things, and some of them will succeed and most of them probably won't. And it'll be interesting to see who does what.
I'll take a complete opposite opinion. Sorry, David. I think these are revolutionary. We adopted a team messaging application in my own company about 2 years ago. We do not send internal email anymore. It is completely frowned upon. We had struggles with, and to your point, I think scale is going to be a big issue, especially in large organizations. We had struggles with notification overload, because what happens is email is kind of a formal, way of talking. I'll go IM chat with somebody, and if I can't get it resolved or I have to pull additional people in, then I'm going to sit down and write an email, and now it's something I probably have to put a little more thought in. Where team chat applications are just so easy to use and so natural conversational that you can end up chatting all day long. We get into long brainstorming discussions where, okay, I got to get off this now and do some work. So you have to deal with interruption management. You have to learn how the tools allow you to mute conversations that aren't of interest to you and so on. But that's sort of the early initial stage of what makes these tools, in my opinion, really useful, getting out of email and now getting into contextual conversations that really don't have a start and finish. But the second part is we're starting to see a big push toward workflow integration. Slack had an announcement yesterday with Workday, where you can do Workday type HR functions like approval of expenses, onboarding, and so on in Slack. This morning we had a conversation internally about we're implementing a marketing tool called Pardot, which allows you to capture website interactions. And so we were looking at, okay, how do we get an email when somebody comes to our website and registers? And then we thought about, wait a minute, we've got Slack. Can we find an integration? There were 20 off-the-shelf integrations. So in a matter of minutes, we're able to set up a workflow that allows us to pop a note into a Slack channel. Says, hey, we just got a new visitor to our site. So the amount of workflow integrations that become possible in this kind of contextual environment really are revolutionary for I think the way people will work. So if you just think of it as another form of chat, yeah, it's probably going to get annoying and people will drop out. But if you think about it as changing workflows and replacing email, I think we're finally, we've been asking for years, what's going to replace email? I think this is finally the tool that does it.
David, I'm going to let you comment because I know you're covering the workflow space for us at Infocom in addition to your other duties. But Erwin, I'll just ask you in fairness, how many people are there in your organization?
There are 10. So as I mentioned, it is a smaller organization, but we're seeing even larger companies. In our last study that we published about a month ago, 25% of the organizations that we talked to had enterprise-wide deployments of these tools, and that covers the entire range: small, medium, large companies.
Yeah, that's the piece that I'm really concerned about. I used chat applications. We use Cisco Spark. I mean, I use all of them. I use Microsoft Teams as well. You know, we have to. My company has all the products, so we have to eat all the dog food at the same time. But I use them for projects. I use them when I'm bringing together small teams. They're more useful than email. They're terrific. But again, not everybody's going to use them. So I think the factor of scale. And the interesting thing is now that Microsoft has announced, if you're using Office 365, Sky for Business is going away. This is their 2-year cycle about changing their name once they've got an audience. But anyway, the Sky for Business is going away. Now you're going to have Teams. I think that's going to push the industry to the tipping point faster than it would have if they didn't. Everybody on Office 365 is going to have Teams, and people will realize where it's really, really valuable and where it isn't. Faster than the industry would have. So, thank Microsoft. We're going to get there a lot quicker. But again, David, I cut you off. I know you're covering the millennial workflow here. You want to get the last word on this subject?
Yeah, sure. Team messaging may not be the end game. You may be right. In 3 years, we may be using something completely different and look back, but it's not a diversion. It's a step forward. We're not going back to UC. We're not going back to Jabber. That's not happening. And teams that are using this are not going to go back to email. It's impossible to be as productive on email after switching to this. The phenomena of my team gets things done faster. It's amazing. It's more fun. All of that's real. All of that's real from any team that's experienced. But David, you have a real point, which is this an enterprise thing? Yeah, it's magic for small medium business. I mean, anyone small medium business, well, not anyone, but the majority of small medium business that try this don't just say, yeah, it works for us. You can't get them to shut up about it, like me. Is it going to work in enterprise? I think that the current tools may not have everything that's needed for enterprise. We do have scalability issues. I do think the workflow can work to enterprise. So I kind of agree and disagree with you. I agree with you that this stuff isn't ready for enterprise, but I disagree that this workflow wouldn't work enterprise if we can figure out the magic, if someone gets a solution right to support it.
Well, and real quickly, David, I would actually agree with David, because it's in the name, right? Teams. That you're not going to have everybody from the CEO all the way down to the mailroom on the exact same chat software, channel. Trying to make sure that I'm covering what everybody's nomenclature is for this. But whether it's Slack or it's Teams or it's Spark, as long as you can condense it to people that need to talk to each other, right? And as these teams are spread, we have remote workforce, and that's becoming more and more of a thing. You're going to have, these teams of people that need to talk to each other that would normally be trading email. You can condense that into a chat, channel, and yeah, those folks, whether it's at IBM or whether it's a small medium business in St. Louis, that makes sense, right? But condensing it and containing it to the folks that just need to talk to each other. You're not going to put all 1,000 employees on the exact same chat, because that doesn't make any sense, and that just creates nothing but noise. But if you can condense it into actual teams and use it for teams, I think it's useful.
Okay, so let's transition to the interesting participants at Enterprise Connect. And before I do that completely, I do want to shout out for a second that this was the first Enterprise Connect where Slack showed up. They had a presentation, and during their presentation, everybody was looking on the Twitter sphere and saying, "Oh my God, what happened to this guy's pants? Maybe they got stolen in the last Slack breach." I was you guys were there, I assume. Did you hear about our representative of Slack showing up in shorts and a t-shirt on stage?
I did not. I did not. I must have missed that. What? What? Why?
David Irwin?
I did get to see the keynote. There's a little bit of California meets East Coast going on at Enterprise Connect. If I go out to events in California, I expect to be wearing jeans and maybe a decent shirt. If I'm at Enterprise Connect, I'm probably still wearing a suit and a sport coat. And so you have that clash of cultures of the older legacy system vendors meeting the new brash software vendors, and that was apparent on stage.
And unfortunately, a lot of the people who presented, I'll include the Slack presentation, don't really look at or know the history or speak to analysts about the history of Enterprise Connect keynotes. The chat on stage doesn't work no matter who's doing it. So you lose interest very quickly. People are sitting in that room for the 15, 20, 30-minute slot trying to understand what is your objective, where are we going, what can we learn from you. We don't want to hear the anecdote about, when you launched your application or who the 19 users are and how they're using it. We really want that short session to be full of facts. And we got to see if we can ban conversations from the keynote stage going forward, because they just don't work.
Yeah, but didn't we have that problem in previous years? I don't remember if it was it Google, and I think they came out and we wanted to hear, oh, how is the Google Suite going to compete with Office? What are the features? What are you doing? And they had an example of a company that was using it and doing well with it. And it's like, help us out. But back to the shorts and t-shirt, I completely agree. People in this industry should look professional. Guys should not be growing out their hair and growing weird beards. Everyone should be clean cut, wearing suits and ties. Sorry.
Okay, and for all anybody knows, that was one of Logitech's T-shirts last year, right? We may all not be wearing pants right now, so let's leave it at that, and let's talk about this who showed up at Enterprise Connect, the concept of GAFA, the term that you introduced me to, Tim, the idea of Google, Amazon, Facebook, and Apple, or reverse that, or put it in any way that you'd like to put that in. But we had Google presenting. They now have a suite of products led by their Google Hangouts Meet. Apple, as you know, is doing a tremendous amount of integration with Cisco and have a lot of products there. Facebook showed their team chat applications for baristas. They were giving the example, and that's a great example, actually, that they're in coffee shops where the participants want to have the sense of community and share knowledge, but none of them are going to be firing up a PowerPoint or a spreadsheet. They're all just communicating. So they were showing that project. And then, you had Amazon Web Services there, AWS, talking about their suite of products there as well, Chime and some of the other things they're working on. You get the feeling that these, and I'll use a term I got from Rachel Bradshaw, these Leviathan companies at one moment could put a piece of code in or flip a switch and vastly change the industry. And right now it doesn't seem like they're doing that yet. They're kind of dipping their toes in the water, but the potential energy is out there. Do you guys agree?
Yeah, I definitely do. Facebook, I thought, gave a fantastic keynote, and they are the one company that, a lot of companies have been trying to challenge Microsoft and have really been struggling. They're the one that seems to maybe have the right way to crack the market, because they're not going IT. When we do our research, we're talking IT leaders, Facebook isn't even on their radar. But then they're finding out that, they just sold into the HR department, or they sold into the sales team. And they're not, they're selling a solution that's very easy for lines of business to implement without having any IT involvement.
I think that goes to another interesting point, right? As we're moving, a lot of these services are moving out of being IT services and they're moving into lines of business, then it changes the entire dynamic. As Erwin's already suggested, right? The HR department suddenly is buying what would traditionally be IT services. Now, they don't see it as an IT service. They see it as whatever they use it for, right? They see it for recruiting new people to the company. What's interesting about that is that, and I read somewhere that your average CMO, Chief Marketing Officer, will have a bigger budget for IT services than your average CIO by apparently this year. Now, I don't know if that's really true, but they're certainly gaining on them. And the reason that matters is because the conversations you would have with a Chief Marketing Officer or the HR officer or the Chief Revenue Officer would be a completely different conversation and a completely different language than you would talking to the IT director. And I personally think that's fascinating, because the old certainties of, well, we know the CIO is, and we're going to sell him things or her things, and we've got a way of talking. It's all turned on its head. Do the traditional players, any of them, know how to talk to chief marketing officers? There's plenty of companies that do.
That's why we, the technologists in the industry, and I speak for the IT, the collaboration industry, I speak for the AV industry a little bit as well. I'm kind of the Spock, half and half, and nobody likes me. But that's why I said we've had to change the conversation for years. We need to stop being the no police. We need to stop saying, here's what we get because this is what we get. And we need to start partnering with our internal clients and explain to them why, no, I don't want you to put in this team chat application because it's been breached every 6 months for the last 2 years, and because it's not compliant, and we can't use it. But I hear you. I know what your needs are. and help us pick what we are going to use so that we can be compliant and protected and legally in a good place and making the most of the company funding that's available. And the funny thing is, when you have that conversation with your users, not only do you get them onto the product suite that you need them to be on, but you also drive adoption through the roof because they've been consulted. And it's so hard. There's so many clients come to me and say, Dave, we've decided to deploy XYZ as a tool. Can you come in and help us drive adoption? And the answer is, okay, sure, I can give you some tricks and help you with some of it, but you've already blown it. You can't pick this stuff before you talk to your people. Tactics come after strategy, which comes after what are the objectives you want to find. And it's so hard to find organizations that will let you pick it up at that point.
I mean, just as a sort of follow, I agree with what you're saying, right? So, for example, your average CMO is going to make a decision on the CRM system, the customer relationship management system. The IT director, realistically, probably isn't in a position to make a valued decision on that platform. But what they should do, what marketing needs to do, is use IT as we'd like to use this platform, but what are the issues around it? Now, of course, the more that it's a service, and therefore all IT needs to do is deliver IP connectivity and security and maybe some basic applications, then the less they have to be involved. I think what it's producing is an environment where IT directors, and quite rightly, by the way, I think it's the right move, are looking for the most flexible solutions possible so that they can put something in today at a hardware level that will support whatever services different parts of the organization want to go to in the future. Because what the CMO never does is ask the HR director, well, what system are you putting in? Is it compatible with mine? They couldn't care less. They're all doing their own things. So IT's got to make certain that everyone plays nice at some level.
Erwin, I know you recently completed some research around partners and technologies that organizations are using, and I think your research kind of backs up this idea that it's very, very mixed and widespread and hybridized right now, with a lot of the companies really starting to penetrate. Would you agree?
Yeah, I agree. I think, and to both Simon and David's point, somebody asked me what was the kind of the big theme I heard at Enterprise Connect, and I said it's workflows. It's tying it's IT changing from a shared service model where we put the video conferencing system, the phone system, the email platform out there and have fun with it, to working with how do we take the tools that we can deliver and embed those and integrate them with business processes to show some demonstrable outcome. A lot of companies call this, you've probably heard a million times, digital transformation. I spent Tuesday at a conference in Chicago and saw a briefing from a company called K2 Technologies, and they're touting this idea of the citizen developer. We're going to put things like they have their own platform, but if this, then that, and Zapier and other type services that allow people to say, here's the workflow I've got all these different back-end applications. Now, I'm smart enough to be able to code because I'm younger and I've spent time coding in high school or whatever. And so you're putting those tools directly in the hands of people. And now everyone starts to have some IT role and some ability to customize the services that are provided to them to better perform in their own business environment. And again, it gets really powerful. And I think it goes back to that theme of, IT can't just be the Dr. No and just here's what you use and tough if you don't like it, but it's going to happen whether they like it or not.
What about this idea that you never know where Amazon Web Services is going to be, or where Google's going to be, or I mean, are these companies really going to come in and reshape the industry, or are we worried about them?
Yeah, I think they certainly are. You've seen it ever since Skype came out, how many years ago? Where I wrote a report 15 years ago on what do enterprise managers need to know about Skype, because everybody's using it in your company, whether you know it or not. So, it's a continual process, keeps coming into play. A lot of the conversations we're having with organizations are around how do I establish a governance compliance framework that allows people to use the kinds of applications that best suit their need in a manner where I can meet retention, security, auditing requirements, and so on. So that gets real interesting, especially with GDPR coming out. I think in May it goes into effect. That's woken a lot of organizations.
Everything in Europe is going to be different.
Just very briefly, David, one of the things that will interest me is if we're going to really talk about heavy workflow environments, it'll be interesting to see if Salesforce ever come to Enterprise Connect or Oracle. I'm excited about when those things happen. It's a very new world, much more so. It all looked like it was concatenating down to a few players, and now suddenly the market seems to be expanding out to dozens or hundreds of players. It feels very rejuvenated, actually.
Well, and I think, the traditional rivalry between Cisco and Microsoft that you've seen over the years in the past as the two bigger players in the collaboration space sort of mitigated itself a little bit because I think they're realizing that each other are not the competition everybody else is. So I think you're going to start to see them playing a little bit more nicely in the sandbox. David, Tim, any thoughts on this stuff?
Yeah, I feel it's almost unfortunate. It's an unfair playing ground. The new startups, the Zooms, the Blue Jeans, it's people buy them if they like them. Microsoft, Apple, they have ways of making us use their stuff whether or not it's our favorite, right? We all use FaceTime. I make tons of FaceTime calls. It happens to be good, but I don't use it because it's good. I use it because the company that sold me this device put a big FaceTime button and made it harder to use the other things. Um, so many people are using Skype for Business, and so many people are going to be using Microsoft Teams because it's bundled with Office 365, and you need Office 365. Well, a lot of us do. If you're a nerd and you use Excel, you can't take away my Excel. So it's unfair that so many of us are going to be using Microsoft Teams unless it's terrible, which it's not going to be. Not that necessarily based on its merits, but because it's there and it's okay. I wish I had like a happy spin on this and say, but some company might come up with something amazing that's going to be so great that it's going to kill the Giants. No, we got to hope the Giants
Yes.
play nice.
No,
Yeah?
no, David. No,
No.
I would argue very briefly. So I'm not saying that I think Teams actually looks like it's going to be a fine product, but if you went back in time to the
I love that you guys are
1990s.
describing Teams, which is active and available now, about how good it's going to be. But
Well, all
I
right,
won't
only
go there.
because we were about to make something out and we haven't done it yet. So, but if you think back to 1990, you would have said, well, WordPerfect, Lotus 123, Novell NetWare, they've all got an unassailable lead. They're going to win forever. The market will never change from those because they've become the de facto standards. And now, if you want to know anything about any of those companies, you have to go to Wikipedia. Now, I'm not suggesting that's going to happen to the existing players, but just because something looks certain today doesn't mean that it'll be certain in the future. History would indicate that's true.
Yeah, and I would unfortunately, I'm going to agree with Simon, much to my detriment. um, I would take issue with David in saying, just because Microsoft made it doesn't mean that Teams is going to be great. It's not. It's Microsoft, right? These folks are not known for their overabundance of user interface greatness. It may eventually get there, and it may eventually, not suck. But I agree with Simon on two things. First of all, the giants will come and go. Somebody's going to rise and somebody's going to fall. We're recording this towards the end of March right now. Facebook is in the midst of its own PR crisis and with user data and the fact that they were at Enterprise Connect a week before this happened. It will be kind of telling as to how they weather this and whether or not they lose any market share and any ground over the next couple of weeks and the next couple of months. But you look at the products and services that all of us have used over our careers, and there have always been rises and falls. Now, yes, at one time, Apple was on its last leg. And, if you would have talked to somebody 30 years ago and told them, Apple is going to be the biggest player in these spaces, whether it's, technology or telephony, which they are now, and computers, they would have laughed at you and said, well, you're kidding me. It's just this little box. Well, no, they are who they are. But in 20 or 30 years, are they going to be the predominant force? Who knows, right? If any of us know that, we can put money where the next thing is going to be. But none of us really know because of two different things. First of all, the users are fickle. And, you may have the greatest thing, and it may be the best interface and the best experience ever. And if users don't adapt to it, then it'll sit on a shelf and get picked up by somebody for their intellectual properties. But, the fact that Microsoft and Cisco are suddenly playing nice because they realize that everybody else is their competitors, everybody is everybody's competitor. Period. End of sentence. And if the AV industry has taught me anything, it's taught me that is that eventually businesses are going to want to grow and expand, and that's what they do. If you want to grow revenue from this year, from last year to this year, you have to figure out different channels or different markets. And a lot of ways that these companies are doing so is they're looking at other markets that are sort of kind of like theirs, and then they go, oh, well, we can do that, right? You look at an audio company that has been an audio company for 30 or 40 years, and suddenly their audio is on the network, and well, we can put video on the network too. Well, suddenly they're competing with video, companies or switchers, or control companies. Well, the same thing's happening here. Where you have companies that have traditionally been infrastructure companies that they purchase a video conferencing system because, well, the video conferencing system is on the network. We do the network. We can do that, right? And then they do something else. You guys mentioned Amazon. Amazon's in everything, right? Amazon started very slowly in delivering food, and suddenly they bought Whole Foods. They have an incredible server farm that they're able to create all these great applications and make access and give access to folks. They're going to start, developing, other applications, and I would not be overly shocked within a year or two where you have an Amazon, soft codec system. I don't know anything. I'm not, but I am predicting that I wouldn't be overly surprised. So the one thing I would say is that all these folks are competing with each other at the same time that they're playing nice.
Okay. So it's interesting. We've now had this conversation for over 40 minutes, and nobody's talked about any hardware. It's kind of the opposite of the way we used
Because
to
it's
do
dead.
Well, no.
I would object to that.
Let's focus on for what we saw at ISE and Enterprise Connect. Each one of us, one at a time. What's the coolest thing that you saw? Available, not available, showing. I mean, I'll start this with the that wonderful little docking station that Microsoft had in their keynote from Plantronics, where you walk into the office and drop your mobile phone on, and all of a sudden your mobile phone is now your desk phone. That's one piece of technology that's going away. I remember, I'm sitting behind me over here in my mess, that I've got these huge phone books from all the companies that I worked at, and then over the transition of my career, I stopped dialing people's company number and just started dialing their mobile because that's how we all do business. So doing away with the desktop phone looks like, it's sort of, that we kind of already did away with it, didn't we? So that looked really cool to me. Let's go in order of what we have over here. So hopefully I'm not calling you guys out. David, what have you seen over the last couple of shows from a device perspective that you think is really cool?
No, I really like the new software. Well, I was just saying software, but the peripheral kits that are built for software meeting rooms, the hardware peripheral kits that are built for software meeting rooms. I love that concept. It used to be that we just had these two universes. There was hardware video, the Polycom Cisco life-size systems that sit in the meeting rooms, and there was the desktop mobile stuff. And then there's, we can make them talk to each other now, and we can even make them talk to each other well now. Well, that's great, but it's still two separate worlds. And I like the idea that if I'm a Videxio customer, a Blue Jeans customer, a Zoom customer, whatever, any of these companies that have these software versions of their desktop software, I can buy this little peripheral kit. Logitech has tons of stuff for that. Dolby has a new kit they had a cool demo for. But you put these in the room. And it took me a while to get this. I'm supposed to be good at this, but I'm like, what's the big deal? Okay, so I'm running Zoom on my desktop, or right now we're using Blue Jeans. So if I have a Blue Jeans room system, it has a better camera, hopefully, and a better speakerphone, and it's a room system. What's the big deal? But no, it's different software. I log into this with my account. When I go to a meeting room, I don't want to log in with my account and type my password in front of everyone and leave it there. It should work like a room system. We shouldn't have to dial a number. There should be a calendar entry like a room system works. And now we have these, and I think the software guys are the guys to thank for it by creating this momentum of, software rooms, software rooms, software rooms. But the hardware guys are like, hey, we like this. We're going to make cameras specially for this. We're going to make speakerphones especially for this. We're going to make bundles with a Nook, all this cool stuff. And it's a really nice synergy, and the end result is what I think a really great experience for this is the first time we said huddle rooms, but for any meeting room, but yeah, any meeting room, but particularly the huddle rooms.
I'll agree with you. And I have to say, I'm still, trying to bang my head and trying to figure out, with so many great choices of systems to cover the space you just described, that are agnostic, that can join, a Skype call or a Zoom call or a Blue Jeans call or any one of the other ones out there. How are there still companies out there marketing products that can't do that? That you can only call their system from their system. I just don't get who would buy a phone that can only call other phones from their brand. But they're still there and they just keep popping out of the weeds. You get a weed whacker and it goes down and three other ones pop up. So it's weird. Erwin, let me go to you. What device or hardware have you seen that you thought was cool?
There was a fantastic punch-down block display at one of the booths. No, I'm just kidding.
I got my tooling back here somewhere. I can still do a punch down. And my butt set.
Yeah, I mean, I think, some of the things you already pointed out, the dock was really interesting. I think what Dolby's doing with voice and the ability to do directional voice, the ability to have, large noises, machines running in the background without that being picked up by the microphones is really interesting. When we talk quite a lot about video, but if the audio experience is poor, it doesn't matter how good the video is. So I'm heartened to see a lot of the video vendors putting a lot more emphasis on audio and coming up with directional microphones and noise cancellation and so on that improves that experience.
Terrific. I agree. Simon?
Well, David, as the guy who was showing off hardware on my booth, this is a hard one for me to be, should we say, non-partisan.
Go ahead, brag, but just make it brief, all right?
Yeah, sure. Well, all I will say, I'm not going to talk about our products, right? Because the most interesting products we had at the booth, I can't talk about anyway, because they're all NDA. But what I will say is this. I've been in this market a while now, and the scale of opportunities that we spoke to clients about was shocking. I'll give you a couple of examples, or one example, because you don't want me to brag too much, but it was an interesting angle. This client said, we're a big user of one of the monolithic suppliers who, can only dial themselves, to your point earlier, and we got 800 systems. And now video is going to become something that facilities put in, not IT. Facilities will put this in and we'll equip every meeting room in the building or in the organization. And I said, how many is that? And they said 8,000. And what was interesting to me was, the cost of this technology is much less, of course. But what ends up happening is if you reduce the cost enough that it's the cost of a chair or two in the room, and that seems to be quite a useful analogy, then it just unlocks the whole thing. And I was really interested to see that I had many customers who said, we've got 500, 1,000 systems. It's taken us 20 years to get to that. And we're going to go to 5,000 or 10,000 systems in the next 18 months. And that's a fundamental shift in the way that video gets used, because suddenly you've got millions of people to ring. And so I was particularly interested in that. The market's got much cheaper over the last few years without necessarily there being a massive growth in the number of units. And maybe we've broken that price elasticity. The market has broken that price elasticity point. And we're now at the point of mass deployment. People tell us they're going to do it. Now the proof's in the pudding. Let's see what happens in the next year or two.
Yeah. I certainly agree with your points, other than the fact that the idea that the technology is moving to facilities, because we've now started to see a big push. I think Erwin, your boss Robin, mentioned it at Enterprise Connect, that or your colleague, I'm sorry, that we're now starting to see technology being taken away from facilities and being moved under IT management because the facilities people are doing it old school and getting it wrong in many cases.
Yeah, I mean, plainly, it's variable. It's variable. It depends on the organization. Some people want to do it that way, others don't.
Yeah, it's definitely a point of conflict, especially as you think about things like digital whiteboards. Is that a facilities buy? Is that a IT buy? It again kind of requires IT to think more of how do I partner with other groups outside of IT.
Yep. Tim, last word, any device or technology from your experience in the last couple of months that stands out?
Well, I can name specific ones if you want, but I'm just going to give it an overarching category, and that is the hardware manufacturers who are connecting to the soft codecs and existing VTCs. And there's two specifically. One is Logitech, not to give Simon too big of a head, but it is Logitech, and I'm using a Logitech Brio now. I was turned on to it about a year ago, and it is my go-to for webcam. Now, obviously, AVNation and regular podcasts we use something else, but that is one of the ones that are they're utilizing, and they're kind of leveraging the soft codecs. Another one is a company called Vadio, part of Milestone, which is part of Legrand now. They made a couple different cameras. One is they are able to tie into Cisco systems now, which I found interesting, and they're using some of the open APIs that Cisco is offering, and you can now buy a audio camera for a Cisco system if you so choose, if you don't like the Cisco cameras. And so this kind of agnosticism in this space is refreshing to me, right? Because if you don't want an all-in-one system, if you want to kind of customize your experience, you can do so now. And I think that's not only refreshing, but it's also very helpful for the end users if they want, a different experience than maybe the folks down the road have.
Okay, very, very interesting, because I'm seeing a lot less customization, but I agree with you. The idea that things now work together are a very, very important point. So this was a terrific chat. It sort of sums up where we are on end of March, early April, and we've got 2 months to go before the big show, Infocom, from the Avixa team in Las Vegas. We're going to be in Las Vegas this year. And I know we're all got a number of things that we're working on. We all happen to be moderating panels on the UC track, except you, Tim, when you're doing some other things as well. So I'm going to be taking on this topic of artificial intelligence in the conference room. I would use some of the trigger names for the Amazon or the iPhone product, but if I did, things would start going off around me. So I'm going to try not to do that. But we're going to start to see more and more of that. There's a big debate around even if we do get that to work and we can deal with security and compliance, do you really want all of the controls on a voice control? Do you want to be able to say, mute me for a second, I want to have a private chat, or will we still need some kind of interface in the room, and will that interface be our mobile? So I think that's a great session. I'm going to be moderating that one at Infocom. David, you're going to be doing the workflows and team chat session, right?
Yeah, I'm excited about that. I mean, from my comments earlier, you tell it's hard for me not to be a cheerleader of it, and it's not because I have any interest in it or anything. I don't think any of my sponsors are even sell that kind of stuff. I just really, really like it, and it's changed the way I've done my business. And there's just a lot of fun stuff to talk about. I mean, not just the phenomenon, but ways to work with it, what teams are doing, and yeah, we'll try to see what the future is. We'll try to talk about those scalability concerns.
Simon, you're taking on the Touch and Collaborate, the whole explosion of interactive whiteboards, whether it's the Spark board or the Surface Hub or Samsung's new Flip or any of Google's Jamboard or any one of the thousands of others that I haven't talked about, and where they're useful, when they're useful, how they're useful, right? That's going to be your bailiwick this year.
Yeah, and it's actually interesting because I did it last year as well. So we had a huge audience. We had about 150 people in the room or something crazy. So it'll be interesting to see how all the claims that the manufacturers made last year, let's see if they've made good on all or any of those. And now let's see this year what all the fuss is about the next generation, because that market's moving super fast. So I think it's going to be a really interesting talk, actually.
Terrific, thank you. And Erwin, you're stepping up to manage our next generation metrics panel this year. The concept of it's more than just call detail record and cost per use, but there are a whole lot of other things that we're getting out of sensors and metrics that then become actionable and can help drive ROI, right?
Yeah, one of the consistent themes we've seen in our research over the last couple of years is IT leaders trying to figure out what is the user experience, what's the business value I'm delivering for the investment I made. And so they look at things like utilization, how do I improve utilization? And they're looking at it, especially as you think about investments in video. And Simon talked about that 8,000 room deployment of video conferencing. If I'm going to do that, I want to make sure that I know if people are using it, I know how it's being used. I want to have some understanding if rooms are being used for video, if they're not being used for video, and that helps me either attack my user awareness strategy in terms of getting more awareness out there, or understanding if what I'm putting out there doesn't necessarily resonate with my user community. So we'll be talking about a lot of those metrics and what can people measure and how can they put that into practice.
Terrific, thank you. And Tim, AVNation TV is going to have a lot of involvement at Infocom as always, including your famous tweet up, right? What are you guys working on?
So on Wednesday from 4 to 6, we have our AVNation tweet up. It's a time for folks to get together who maybe see each other on social media or just communicate throughout the year. It's what we call a walkthrough party. We understand that there are several parties and several things that folks can go to all throughout the Infocom show. So that's why we do it from 4 to 6. It's in our production room, which is in Nancy 217, I believe. From 4 to 6, come by, have a drink, free food and beverage for 2 hours, and just see some folks that maybe you don't get to see in real life for a couple minutes.
Terrific. So we encourage all of you to please come to Infocom this year. It's the first week of June in Las Vegas. And by the way, who doesn't like Las Vegas in June? It's certainly better than Orlando in June. And from a humidity standpoint,
Marginally
anyway.
better.
Yeah, okay, marginally certainly better. So I'm David Danto again. This is AVNation TV's Connected. I really appreciate you joining us. For everyone at AVNation TV, for my panelists, for my colleagues at the IMCCA and everywhere else, thanks for joining us, and we will see you next time.